Creative Radio.
Hello everybody, here is Jeremy Pujol and I'm here with you tonight for the next 3 hours, and I'm not alone. We're here, we organized this event in support of the Palestinians and in particular of the people of Gaza, who since the 30th of March have been experiencing a new period of bloody and disproportionate repression. We've seen yesterday how disproportionate this repression was, with these at least 55 kills and I don't know how many wounded. This situation has to stop, and we gathered tonight for these 3 hours generously offered by the Collabo Radio people. I would like to thank them all, in particular Rosanna. And we're going to start with a little introduction. I'm going to read a bit of the United Nations resolution number 194. But first, let me tell you when this resolution was adopted. It was adopted on December 11th, 1984, near the end of the Arab-Israeli war. The resolution defined principles for reaching a final settlement and returning Palestinian refugees to their homes. It resolved that refugees wishing to return to their homes and live at peace with their neighbors should be permitted to do so, and at the earliest practical date, and that compensation should be paid for the property of those choosing not to return and for loss of or damage to property which, under principle of international law and equity, should be made good by the government's authorities responsible. This is the Article 11 of this resolution adopted in 1948 by the UN nation, and we can see that 70 years later, nothing or almost nothing have been done. The situation is getting worse, and I hope that the apartheid in Israel can be stopped very soon. And yeah, so what do we have tonight? Tonight we'll have a show by Cédric Fermont for the first 45 minutes. He will introduce Palestinian musicians to you. Then we'll have a concert by Dira Kalash. Dira is a Palestinian musician. He plays oud tonight. He will reinterpret traditional songs, music from Palestine. Then we'll have Zuki Osman for 45 minutes, maybe a bit less, with hidden stories and an interview of a Palestinian woman living in Germany. Then Dira will play again for us, and then we'll finish with Frank Barra, the coordinator of the Russell Tribunal on Palestine. That's it. So let's start our program, and I hope this can help a little bit the situation there. I really hope to convince you tonight that we have something to do all together, because we're all concerned. Cédric, if you want to start your show, you're on.
Hello, so yeah, it's Cédric, and I'm going to play about 45 minutes of Palestinian music and music from the diaspora, with a special focus onto electronic, experimental and electroacoustic music and a tiny bit of hip-hop as well. So we are going to start with Munir Anastas and a track called Né du Néant, published in 2005. It's interesting to see that Munir Anastas is not only a composer, but he currently works as assistant ambassador of Palestine and cultural advisor to the delegation in Palestine of UNESCO in Paris since 2000. After Munir Anastas, we will listen to Donia Jarar, who is a Palestinian American composer. She's a pianist and multimedia artist whose work spans the genres of classical music, electronic and experimental music, but also pop music. Here we go. heard first Munir Anastas with a piece called Né du Néant. It was a piece for tape and saxophone. The saxophone was played by Daniel Kinzi. And after Munir Anastas, we heard Donia Jarar with a piece called The Dictator Balances on His Inside Edge. We are now going to listen to Asma Khanum, who is a Palestinian artist born in Damascus and currently living in Ramallah. After Asma Khanum, we will listen to Tashwish, collective also based in Ramallah, a collective that works in the field of audio-visual art. So the first piece by Asma Khanum is called Bang Bang Opera, and the piece of Tashwish is called Intro.
هؤلاء جميعا في لهوهم ولعبهم يشتركون في شيء واحد سامعني منيح ولا كتير في تشويش؟ هاي الايام كتير في تفتيش، في كتير تنبيش. خد على نفس يلا عيش، بسألك مالك ماليش، انفك الفيش تهميش شتلت وكتيش. وجاي الغضب مش عشان ما قبض شعب انتفض، اصولي من يافا ومن صفد. التهاون انخفض، الاستعمار الرفض، بيحكوا عن سلام بس صار لما طفر.
شوفي بدك تشرب فنجان قهوة يا شباب، يا شباب بدك تشرب يا لو بدك تشرب.
I don't even know if he's a native or a white man. He's just a name. In Arabic it means
We heard first Asma Khanam from Ramallah, and followed by Tashwish, also from Ramallah. The Tashwish, an audiovisual collective that brings together the different practices and interests of artists. Rouane Aburame Mukata and Basel Abbas. And we are now going to listen to Storm Trap. We stay in a kind of hip-hop vibe. And after Storm Trap, we will listen to Mukata also. Sorry for the pronunciation. So the piece of Storm Trap is called Halem Fil. And the one of Mukata is called La Lisanala.
المنظر هون جوهرة، للحظة نسيت انها القرى الأرضية كلها مدورة. حلم في البكسل سابع نوم نتيجة السهر، جوا راسي مرق شهر، عطشان شربت كل البحر، صحيت لقيت الدنيا ظهر. كل شي مضوي بغسل وجهي، بتذكر كيف كنت جاهز اتخلى عن مخي. هارب من الساعة خرطة تسقطني، يا بتعالج جرحية بتهجم زي طب قطبي مطنش كل مفتي. الحياة بحد ذاتها أمان، نضالة لجار، طموحك شنطة مضبوبة على المطار، خصوصية أسرار على قمار، غنم بدون راعي، امبراطور بدون واعي، بفوضى تدخل ناوي يلعب كد كيماوي. ثورة انولدت، مقاومة انقرضت، شعوب انطردت، ناس انقرفت، ليش قواتهم ما انصرفت؟ شرق أوسط طاولة رزق ختامها مش مسك، شوية تلج مع ويسكي أهم اشي ياخد حصتي. هذا وضع مش راكب، بيجي الاجنبي بياخد دبل الراتب، خليك ساكت ناطر دبر خاتم، بس مش ظابط تكون شاطر، لك خاطر تصير قاتل يحكوا عنك عاطل. فبلجأ للدفاتر، بطل تطلق في المصادر، مصدر المشاكل الاعلام ماكل راسك الفاخر. يمكن ازعلك للاسف بخبرك كله مفبرك، كيف نظام جديد يعبرك وبحضر في قبرك. نستقبل الامبرالية باحضان مفتوحة، بكره 99% من اراضينا مسروقة والناس مفلوقة. حرب عراق منسوخة وسيتم تطبيقها على راما سوريا، ضد بغدادك تعلم التئوريا. عايش بعكس يوتوبيا بستورر جنوب اثيوبيا، انا خوفي يا صديقي نوقع بهستيريا. انساني من نظام عثماني، اردوغاني اسلامي او علماني صهيوني تحت اسم تاني. مياه ارمي نيفي وبلد رامي ليفي، لو عكيفي بطلع سيفي بقطع روسكم كلكم بيبي. نفط واقع بين ايدين غلط، عرب بلا شرف مع هدف يمارسوا المرض جوا الغرف. لبعض الناس شغلي ازعاج لما فيش كاش، نادي دشداش مش محتاج الانتاج ندعم منتاج. كلمات بلا مونتاج، امسي نفس شي منفاخ، رئيس وقف زد وقاب مين قال الهيب هوب مات.
So we heard Storm Trap, who is or was a member of Ramallah Underground, he is known as Asif. And then we heard Mukata, also known as Boycott. And we keep listening to some hip-hop and rhythmical music. The hip-hop scene in Palestine is pretty big. We are going to listen to Checkpoint 303 and Jawahir Shawani. And after Checkpoint 303, we will listen to Saud, who is a Palestinian currently living in Brussels and operating in the field of electronic music and techno and so on.
الله يساعد الله يعين وعلي صار بفلسطين بسد ال48 يجوا علينا هاجمين والله يساعد والله يعين وعلي صار بفلسطين أطلعونا من البيوت حافين وعريانين.
I'm going to read you the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. Of the inherent dignity and of the equal and inalienable rights of all members of the human family is the foundation of freedom, justice, and peace in the world. In the Charter reaffirmed their faith in fundamental human rights, in the dignity and worth of the human person. Now, therefore, the General Assembly proclaims this Universal Declaration of Human Rights as a common standard of achievement for all peoples and all nations. And all nations. And all nations. And all nations. And all nations.
We just heard Sot with a track called 1001 States, and previously we heard Checkpoint 303 and Jawahar Shofani and a piece called In 1948. We go to some more positive music now with Rea Dali. She's a Lebanese Palestinian composer currently living in South Africa. And her piece is called Mohammarat Rambo Will Comtessa. After Rea Dali, we will listen to Dirar Kalash, who is going to perform tonight, but two sets that are pretty different than what I'm going to play on the radio. Dirar's track is called Asphalt Prophecies. So we first listen to Rea Dali.
Okay, thank you, Cedric, for these fantastic pieces. Something, and just before I let Dira Kalash starting his first concert, you should know that I'm getting tattooed at the same time, and this is why maybe my voice is a bit trembling. This tattoo performance is made by Densha Tattoo, and it was designed in collaboration with Belal Khaled, a calligrapher and photographer met in Gaza, and Densha Tattoo, who made the design of the key representing the right to return for all Palestinians. So now I want to read you two small texts from writings from Hannah Arendt called Zionism Reconsidered. She wrote that in 1944, so before the Nakba happened. And here we go. Nationalism is bad enough when it trusts in nothing but the root force of the nation. A nationalism that necessarily and admittedly depends upon the force of a foreign nation is certainly worse. This is the threatened fate of Jewish nationalism and of the proposed Jewish states, surrounded inevitably by Arab states and Arab peoples. Even a Jewish majority in Palestine, or even a transfer of all Palestinian Arabs, which is openly demanded by revisionists, would not substantially change a situation in which Jews must either ask protection from an outside power against their neighbors or come to a working agreement with their neighbors. And I jump a few lines after. The Zionists, if they continue to ignore the Mediterranean peoples and watch out only for the big faraway powers, will appear only as their tools, the agents of foreign and hostile interests. Jews who know their own history should be aware that such a state of affairs will inevitably lead to a new wave of Jew hatred. The anti-Semitism of tomorrow will assert that Jews not only profited from the presence of the foreign big powers in that region, but had actually plotted it, and hence are guilty of the consequences. That was the two first extracts of Hannah Arendt's writings, and now I let Dira Kalash start his concert for us. Thank you, Dira.
was Dira Kalash at the workshop in Forsterstrasse in Berlin for We Are All Gaza. You're listening to Club Radio on 88,4 Berlin and 90,7 in Potsdam, Preis Radio Berlin, Pi Radio Verbund. I'm Shantisuki Osman, and for today I've created a special version of my regular show, Hidden Stories, which hopes to center on female Palestinian voices and considers the intersectional nature of the struggle in Gaza. So I was lucky enough to speak with Nadine Tawfik, who's a Palestinian academic living in Berlin. And we met just the other week and we talked about what this anniversary means to her. And we chose some music and some poems together, which will also feature in this radio piece. So there'll be music by Camilla Jubran, Rimbana, and Shams Asma, and poems in English by Fadwa Tukan and Dareen Tatur. And we met by a very noisy S-Bahn in Mitte in Berlin to chat. So you'll hear that in the background. I think I will just play that now, so do enjoy.
It means a lot, and of course it started with like a very concrete historical series of events in 1948 that basically mean dispossession, expropriation, being expelled from your homeland, losing your home, being torn apart from your family members. But what is kind of most traumatic about it is that it's ongoing. Now we could speak about what actually happened in 48, but in fact it is whatever bits and pieces you'll get from every family member of a Palestinian living wherever in Gaza or in today's Israel, the West Bank, Jerusalem, Germany, the US. Everyone has bits and pieces of memory, of historic collective memory of what happened then and how it influenced the course of history for Palestinians, for an entire region, and for, of course, individuals wherever they live. And so 70th anniversary of Nakba is indeed painful because where the one side is celebrating its independence and emancipation and maybe in a way the end of discrimination and surely genocide, it's painful to realize that the way they're realizing this independence is by perpetrating a slow genocide. And so the independence of the one is the continuing mourning of an entire people. And that's very painful to see. And in that sense, it also doesn't matter whether you're still in Gaza or the West Bank or Jerusalem or Nazareth or Jaffa, or abroad as a refugee. Being Palestinian in that sense is not connected to where you are located right now. It's almost like a state of mind. You could say maybe it's a Weltanschauung. Of course, as a Palestinian, of course I have Palestinian parents and grandparents and ancestry. But my point is more that the Nakba says something, the way you look at the Nakba says a lot about how you locate colonialism today, racism today, oppression, discrimination. So 70 years of Nakba, I think, says a lot about the Weltanschauung. So before I say something more concretely on the female storytelling, one thing that I have been told, and I think many Palestinians too, is, and that is still very dear to us, is that there's a memory of how things were before 48, before the creation of the state. And many of us have histories of what it meant as a Palestinian, true in British mandate Palestine, so there was colonialism back then too. But there were stories about Palestinian Muslims visiting Palestinian Jewish wedding parties. There were stories of neighborhood events of greeting each other, coming together. even have my grandfather telling me about how they would bring to the British colonial officer the Arabic bread, and they would love it so much. And so it's really important to know stories, to transmit stories of what it meant to the sense of coexistence, still under colonial rule, but the sense of coexistence that made it possible to live together as at least neighbors. I'm not using political terms now, but let's say as neighbors in like a good spirit. And that to me is very important in remembering pre-48 Palestine. Then it is true that a lot of the post-48, and again 48 is very important, but it's also one of many very dramatic years, because there's 48 and of course many things happen in between, but of course there's also 67. And so basically people keep telling, my family members tell me about like, and yes, my aunts, so very female, very close person, told me about what it meant to, yes, to suffer, to keep family united, to care for everyone, to make sure everyone is safe, to protect children at night, to deal with racial slurs, to have this sense of insecurity while there's the willingness to survive. It's very heartbreaking stories of mothers too weak to nurse their children, thinking about leaving them behind. While aunts say you can't do this, you have to carry your child with you even though you can't nurse it. Let me see if I can find someone on our way fleeing who can provide us with some milk. So it's this mixture of very getting a first-hand account of suffering, of fear of death, trauma. But for those, of course, who were lucky to survive, of course, narrating the very personal story is a story of resistance. The fact you've survived, the fact you've attempted to keep your family together, the fact that there is a narrative that starts pre-48 and that keeps on going, the fact that young children still have a sense of what you could call historic Palestine, I think is not only marks resistance, but it marks a certain success in keeping up your identity. And maybe what I would like to stress is somehow the pictures of 48 do merge with pictures we're seeing today. So it doesn't even feel like this historic past, because it's the past present. So you can still see people fleeing their homes. You can still see people dispossessed and expropriated pretty much all across kind of the historic Palestine landscape. And it's this, and of course you could say it's problematic that for Palestinian today, a lot of the identity is related to Israel. And that is in a way problematic, that we cannot define our identity today without Israel. But of course the same goes for any Israeli. You cannot define Israeli identity without reference to Palestine. And in a sense you could say, okay, so we're kind of bound together, we're in this together, there's no way escaping each other, at least, you know, in this very modern 70 years perspective, you know. And I think it could be vice and virtue at the same time, that we have to just try to get out of this together.
Enough for me to die on her earth, be buried in her, to melt and vanish into her soil, then sprout forth as a flower played with by a child from my country. Enough for me to remain in my country's embrace, to be in her close as a handful of dust, a sprig of grass, a flower.
Hear more about the feminist perspective, right? So in my case, I have 7 strong aunts. So I'm clearly, the feminist perspective clearly is the dominant perspective. It's clearly a perspective of having lost everything and then having to stand up on your own feet again, because that's the only chance you have. And I was born into a family with strong women who, as refugees, nevertheless managed to get education through the UN schooling, and who managed to keep an entire family, an extended family, surviving. So basically what I want to say is that for me, of course, the whole story is a feminine story. I guess it's stories of you can't allow yourself to give up. I mean, maybe that's the main story, that you. I mean, whoever has family knows this feeling that you have to, at least in front of your kids, you always have to pretend things are normal, things are fine, and there's going to be a tomorrow, and we'll be okay with food, and we'll be okay with shelter and housing and your education, and we'll put money aside. And so there's this, it's like that's what you have to pretend when you have family, when you have children. You have to pretend we're going to be fine. While at the same time, of course, everyone can watch the ugliness of the situation. And so I think I grew up with that kind of feminist voice, that the world is very ugly and very brutal. But maybe the heavy load of care gives you a way to, gives you feeling for the fact that you nevertheless cannot afford to fail. You just simply cannot afford to fail. I mean, by now there are more Palestinians living outside of Palestine than inside of Palestine, and I'm one of those that I was not born in Palestine. I was born basically already as a refugee in Lebanon, and then my parents came to Germany, and but then I lived large parts of my life in Germany, but for reasons of education I've been to the UK and the US and the Middle East. I was very young, actually. My parents left when I was 3, and so I have no memories of Lebanon as such. I usually try to avoid the hyphen in between, because I consider myself to be Palestinian and German. So it's like 100% Palestinian, 100% German, but of course it comes in different. You fill the contents differently. So I'm Palestinian, but I have no Palestinian passport because there's no Palestinian state, right? So, but I'm German and I have German citizenship, but I'm not part of the. So my grandfather was never Nazi, okay? So in that sense, so the way you fill both labels comes kind of differently. And yes, maybe it is in a way challenging to be both Palestinian and German at the same time.
They signed on my behalf and turned me into a file forgotten, like cigarette butts. Homesickness tore me apart, and in my own country I ended up an immigrant. I abandoned those pens to weep over the sorrows of the inkwells. They abandoned my cause and my dream at the cemetery gates, and that person who's waiting laments his luck as life passes. Besiege me, kill me, blow me up. Assassinate me, imprison me. When it comes to my country, there's no backing down.
I see a lot of great local activism by Palestinians in Palestine, trying to raise awareness of what it means to be a Palestinian today within Gaza or in Israel or the West Bank or in East Jerusalem. And it's just that I also see how basically now, even when you see the death in Gaza, you have peaceful protesters being killed, being shot. There is no impunity, no accountability, no nothing. And sometimes the media reports a bit, and at other times largely it ignores it because Palestinian lives are not valued that much. So I see the ever-growing need to internationalize, because we're dealing with a state that really couldn't care less. I mean, it's accused of war crimes, of crimes against humanity, the longest occupation in modern history. I mean, like really ghastly, awful things. And yet, at the same time, you see its power there just increasing rather than decreasing. And so clearly there's no point in waiting for any states to move here. So this is a call for people with conscience. This is a call for the civil society sector. This is a call for people and institutions who've long dealt with repression, discrimination, expulsion, where all the intersectionality of what it means to fight for equality comes to the fore. Like people who are experiencing, seeing exactly what it means when a state is oppressing because of, and in that case you could say because of a mixture of or clearly oppressing because of who you are, because of your ethnicity, because of your religion. And in that case, it's really tragic that it's Jews oppressing against everyone who's not a Jew in Palestine. And the need to internationalize is also a way to basically expand the means of showing solidarity, but of also being able to fight together no matter where you are. So one, you don't have to be Palestinian to fight for Palestine. You don't have to be in Palestine to fight for Palestine. So this is something solidarity movements can do wherever they're based. And of course, this is something that has attracted a lot of attention through the BDS movement, boycott, divestment, and sanction. Because again, you're free, you can make your choices in what you're buying, you can make your choices in who you are institutionally cooperating with. It's true that for the individual it's difficult to affect sanctions or like an arms embargo, but at the same time, especially here in Germany, as we're discussing, arms embargo vis-a-vis Saudi Arabia, vis-a-vis Turkey, it's just hypocritical not to mention Israel here, and so it's a great way just to and plus we do have like historical experience what it means to be active in a boycott movement vis-a-vis apartheid South Africa. So those that are older than us have actually very practical experience, and just saying that's not okay, we don't want to support a state like this. We don't want to support its actions, and so there's a lot of way, and as I said, especially through the BDS movement, to become part of the Palestine Solidarity movement. The idea of looking at equality through an intersectional lens is to see that you you can have. So obviously people can oppress you based on several reasons. Sometimes it's not even entirely clear. And in the case of Palestine too, you could say, is it race? Is it religion? What is it? Or is it your gender? In the case, when they discriminate against, when they refuse you family reunification, that's a clear. There's, for instance, where gender comes in. Of course, there are also complicated questions when it comes now you have disability, for instance. We know that there's a rising number of Palestinians being disabled by Israeli military violence, and of course sexual identity is an extremely important marker here too, because the idea of intersectional equality is that all parts of any society must be equal and must be free. You can't have a hierarchical idea of who's allowed to have what kind of degree of equality. And so what you have in the Palestinian case is, of course, in Palestine you have a fragmentation of the Palestinian population. You have the Palestinians in Israel living under different legal regime than the Palestinians in Gaza, or the Palestinians in the West Bank, or the Palestinians in East Jerusalem, or the Palestinians living as refugees abroad. So what Israeli policies and laws are doing is like fragmenting a society and giving them and making them live under different legal regimes. But only when you look at the society, the Palestinian people in that respect, or the Jewish people, for that matter, and make all of them free and make all of them equal. You could also see how, like in Israel, when you're white Jew is different, you live a different life than when you're a black Jew or when you're an Arab Jew. On top of it, when there's the gender dimension that plays in, or the sexual orientation or age, And so the idea has to be, and maybe, I mean, I'm daydreaming a bit, but maybe this could be like the experiment of a place where oppression works in so many ways, according to so many markers, that maybe one day equality will also bring in all these markers together, because it's true that in that sense it is a very rich place. At this point it's rich of oppression. The question of course is how you can get to like a place that is rich in terms of equality.
في هذا العالم غريبة وفي الغربة وحدة قاسية ووحشة غير أنها تجعلني أفكر أبدا بوطن سحري لا أعرفه وتملأ أحلامي بأشباح أرض قصية ما رأتها في هذا العالم غريبة وقد جبت مشارق الأرض ومغاربها ولا من يسمع ولا من يسمع
I think I would just simply like to make understood that the Palestinian solidarity movement is an inclusive one. It is one that invites everyone who would like to see an inclusive equality in place. And I'm saying this because it shouldn't be misunderstood as a movement that thinks in terms of state, Israeli state or Palestinian state. It doesn't even think in terms of society in the sense that one should be better off than the other, but rather maybe you could even say it's a right-based idea. I mean, I just want it to be understood as a movement that seeks equal rights, and I think it's the equality question here that is very central, and I really hope that the equality question touches the core of what makes the Palestine question so oppressive, and at the same time maybe possibly so rich in one day, making Palestine Israel, and I don't care for the name of that place then, just making it a space where we can all proudly say, yes, this is the space for all religion, and it is the space for all races, and it is the space for all genders, and it is the space for all ages and abilities and sexual orientations. And I think this clearly has to be the aim for whoever wants to call him, herself, themselves a Palestine Solidarity Movement member, And so this is the bar, and it might be like a very high bar, but I think anything below that bar is just not what the people of Palestine deserve.
This is Shanti Suki. That was Hidden Stories, special version, the Nakba episode. You're listening to We Are All Gaza. And we are in Berlin, in Forsterstrasse, at the workshop. And we are broadcasting on Club Radio, 88.4 Berlin and 90.7 in Potsdam, part of Freies Radio Berlin, P Radio Verbund. So, coming up, we've got another concert by Dira Kalash. And I think with that radio piece we just heard, it's perhaps quite nice to have a few questions lingering that we can think about, like how we do position ourselves as, non-Palestinian activists, and what it even means to have this intersectional struggle. So I hope that's something that we can be thinking about as the evening goes on. So I believe we're ready to go with the second part of Diral's concert. And later on, we've got another interview to listen to as well. And that is an interview with Frank Barrett about global Palestine. And the whole time, we've also been listening to the performance audio in between of Jeremy Pujar's live tattooing, which has been quite interesting, actually. And a lot of people have been talking about it in between. So maybe there'll be more discussions after. Okay, I think we're ready to start.
That was Dira Kalash playing from the workshop in Berlin, Fosterstrasse 51. Thank you, Dira. Now I'd like to continue with the end of the text I started earlier, Zionism Reconsidered, from Hannah Arendt, written in 1944. It's the very last paragraph. Zionism will have to reconsider its whole obsolete set of doctrines. It will not be easy either to save the Jews or to save Palestine in the 20th century. That it can be done with categories and methods from the 19th century seems at the very most highly improbable. If Zionists persevere in retaining their sectarian ideology and continue with their short-sighted realism, they will have forfeited even the small chances that small people still have in this known too beautiful world of ours. She wrote that in 1944, and the end of this text is very well related with another text I found that she wrote in 1948, so during the war in Palestine. And this text is called To Save the Jewish Homeland. And even if the Jews were to win the war, its end would find the unique possibilities and the unique achievements of Zionism in Palestine destroyed. The land that would come into being would be something quite other than the dream of world Jewry, Zionist and non-Zionists. The victorious Jews will live surrounded by entirely hostile Arab population, secluded into ever-threatened borders, absorbed with physical self-defense to a degree that would submerge all other interests and activities. The growth of a Jewish culture would cease to be the concern of the whole people. Social experiments would have to be discarded as impractical luxuries. Political thoughts would center around military strategy, and all this would be the fate of a nation that, no matter how many immigrants it could still absorb and how far it extended its boundaries, the whole of Palestine and Transjordan is insane revisionist demand, would still remain a very small people greatly outnumbered by hostile neighbors. That was Hannah Arendt in 1948. And now we will play you an interview that I had with Frank Barra a few weeks ago about global Palestine. Frank Barra, hello.
Hi.
I'm very happy that you accepted my invitation to do this interview in the context of our evening We Are All Gaza. Frank Barra, you are the coordinator of the Russell Tribunal on Palestine. You're an activist, and you're also the author of several books on the Palestinian question, including two in collaboration with Ilan Pappé and Noam Chomsky. When I asked you what you wanted to talk about, you told me that you wanted to talk about global Palestine. Could you maybe tell us something about the concept of global Palestine first?
Yeah, hi, Jeremy. And first, thanks for offering me the chance to sort of participate in this event. I'm so glad this type of things are happening. And I think when I talked about global Palestine, actually, the type of event you're organizing is part of global Palestine. And I think Palestine shouldn't be only about books and academics and conferences and documentaries. It should be about art as well, and various forms and types of art. So we need a sort of different type of events to happen, and to also sort of reach a different audience. You know what I mean? We need to preach. A lot of the time we actually preach to the converted, the people that already know about Palestine, people that go to conferences and stuff. And I think through the event you're organizing, you can reach to a much broader public, artists and others. So that's great. So yeah, when I say global Palestine, I think, and I'm not the only one, obviously, and I'm not the inventor of this concept, global Palestine. But I think that Palestine right now is a sort of laboratory of what is wrong with the world, if you know what I mean, like, a colonialist state, an oppressor oppressing a people that try as hard as it can to defend itself by various means, so it's some sort of a microcosm of what's wrong with the world, because this oppressor and this colonial state is supported and backed by other colonial states and empires such as the US and the EU, etc. But on the other hand, so Palestine is a microcosm of what's wrong with the world, of oppression, of injustice, of inhuman treatment. But on the other hand, with the solidarity movement, with what's happening on the ground, with the boycott, divestment, and sanction movement that is sort of growing all over the world, it's also a symbol of what's great with the world and of what people united together can potentially achieve. And it's also a symbol of resistance, of local resistance, of international resistance. So there's so much in the Palestine question itself that it actually applies to so many conflicts all over the world. And it actually applies to if you talk about the question of the environment, of social justice in general, of getting access to education, to health, to proper jobs. I think Palestine can teach you everything, can teach you the worst of humanity and can teach you also the best of humanity. So that's why I'm sort of talking, and I was interested to talk about global Palestine. It's really a global question.
About global Palestine, about the precise term global Palestine, do you know exactly when it appeared? Because I found it in different articles, in different books, and where does the concept come from?
Yeah, I mean, I wouldn't really give a sort of a date exactly when it happens, because I think the book by Collins.
Yeah, John Collins.
John Collins, right? I forgot his first name. Came out a few years ago now, but people like Israeli anthropologist Jeff Alper, who was the director of the Israeli Committee Against House Demolition, has been talking about global Palestine for many years as well. People in the global in the South have been also talking about how Palestine is akin to some of their struggles. So I think, you can't pin this down to like a date or a day, because Israel also sells itself as a laboratory. Israel sort of, when you go to arms fair or Israel shows and stuff, Israel is very proud to say, come with us for this new sort of tear gas and stuff, because we've tested it. We've tested it on the people of Gaza. For example, Elbit System, which is one of the biggest weapon company, like arms company of Israel. When you go to arms show, they're very proud to say, we've done it. We know how to deal with terrorism. We know how to, and these new weapons that you can buy for whatever millions, we know it's tested, so believe in us. So Israel sort of is very proud to say, in a way, that it's his security industry, his technology industry is sold all over the world. And it's only thanks to the fact that they've got this lab called Gaza, where people are, in a cage, and they can just try everything on them and then sell it. And actually, the weapon and the security industry is one of the biggest industry in Israel. So global Palestine is a term that just fits what's happening on the ground and at the international level perfectly, I think.
And you're talking about Gaza as a laboratory, but do you mean that Gaza was meant to be a laboratory, or did it become a laboratory through the past 70 years or something like this?
Yeah, no, I think it slowly sort of became one, because when Israel was created in 1948, the security and technology industry wasn't that big at the time, right? So, the main idea and that's important, because we, next month, people are going to celebrate the 70th birthday of the birth of the State of Israel, while others, mostly Palestinians and activists and supporters, will celebrate 70 years of the Nakba, which is when Israel was created. And the fact it's not called the Nakba, which is catastrophe in French or in English, because Israel was created. It's because the Jews obviously have the right to self-determination like any other people. If they want, if they feel they're a social group and they want a state, they have the right to have a state, like under international law. But they don't have the right to have a state by squashing, ethnically cleansing, dispossessing, killing, destroying another people. And that's the whole point. People say, "Oh, you're against the Jewish state because you're against the Jews." No, we're against this Jewish state because it was created on top of another people that were there. Like in 1948 when Israel was created, the Jews in Israel Palestine were about 6% of the total population. So it's that's the main problem. So I think when Israel was created, the idea was to grab as much land as we can with as little people as we can, and then throughout the years, Gaza became very convenient to test new weapons, to test new techniques of oppression, etc. But I think it came later on, obviously.
So what you mean, it's Gaza in Palestine is a laboratory for and observed by other countries to control their own people.
Yeah, and that's exactly what I'm talking about. Global Palestine. When Donald Trump talks about building a wall in Mexico, I bet you that many Israeli experts are actually talking to Donald Trump because they know how to do that. When there's the Israeli police and the Israeli military and the Israeli special forces are training most police forces around the world. Even I know the French police has got courses in Israel when, I don't know how many policemen go to Israel to actually, learn from Israel how to deal with this new sort of guerrilla war, terrorism and stuff. And also on a bigger level, when I think it was after Charlie Hebdo in France, when two terrorists killed 11 or 12 journalists of Charlie Hebdo, I was listening to France Inter, which is one of the biggest radio stations in France. And they were talking about how to deal with this new terrorism, with radical Islam and stuff. And at one point they were like, okay, now let's go to our envoy in Jerusalem, a country and a people that have found ways to deal with terrorists for a very long time. So he was in a way saying we have so much to learn from them. And that's the biggest problem now, I think. A friend of mine is an international law specialist, François Dubuisson, here in Belgium. He calls this, and another friend actually, Eyal Sivan, Israeli filmmaker, called this the Israelization of our societies. Slowly, Israel as a democracy, right now Israel is not a democracy. It sells itself as a democracy, but it's not, because it oppresses sort of more than half of its population. But in a way, the new definition of democracy is going to be Israeli democracy. And that's what's very scary. And you see the trends are very clear. You see the way, like in France, people are smashing up students, are smashing up unions. You see the sort of the militarization of the police as well. This is all coming from Israel. And that's something we really have to fight against.
And that's what you mean also when you talk about global Palestine. So could you maybe tell us why and how the situation in Palestine has become so internationally central in the struggle for justice and human dignity?
I mean, it's central, obviously, for obvious reasons. I mean, everybody says it's central, right? Even politicians and stuff. He said, we have to solve Israel-Palestine, to sort of create a better Middle East, etc. And then again, when not all of them, but a lot of people, French, Belgian terrorists that have sort of killed people, blown themselves up, have mentioned Palestine, in their writing, in social media and stuff. Palestine is, there's such an injustice in Palestine that it can create anger and rage, because also the impunity, we're facing a crazy situation when a state that has been convinced by the EU of violating international law, of practicing apartheid, of practicing being engaged in war crimes against humanity and stuff, gets the red carpet treatment by other states and by the UN itself and by France and by the US. So people are always saying, why are you singling out Israel? We're not singling out Israel. France, the US and stuff are singling out Israel by giving them the red carpet treatment when they are rogue states. So
why do you think Israel is so well treated by other countries when it's oppressing its own population?
I think there are various reasons. I mean, when you talk about Israel, it's obviously people think about the Holocaust, think about the Jews dying by millions in Europe and stuff. So there is for sure a sense of being guilty, from France, from Germany, and from pretty much the rest of the world that plays into that. But there's also a very strategic and geopolitical reason for that. Israel is is like an envoy of Europe and of the Western world and our democracy in the Middle East, in the middle of lots of oil and a lot of natural resources. So Israel is some sort of the cop of the region, right? And it's doing the job of the US, of France, of the EU, etc. in being there on the ground. But I think it's becoming more and more problematic because a lot of even like US generals and stuff have said, we need to stop following the Israeli narrative because it's getting, in a way, in a practical sense, in business term, it's actually costing us a lot of money and costing us a lot of friends and a lot of allies. So, but still, right now, with even more with Trump in power, it's hard to see a change coming. But what was your original question again?
My original question was why and how the situation in Palestine has become so internationally central in the struggle for justice and human dignity.
So it's all related to that. I think people personally, I do believe that people are good, and then maybe society and make us what we are later on in life and stuff. But I think people are good, and at heart, I think people do want to fight against injustice. I think anybody that sees an injustice will feel very strongly about that. But that's only if there's an injustice. And the way Palestine is presented in the media, it's often it's a boxing match between Israel and Palestine. They all have claims to that. And but once people realize it's one of the biggest injustices of the last century, and they feel like they want to act. I do think that myself, when I had sort of studied Palestine through films, books, documentaries, and stuff. But when I went there for the first time, it was so obvious that that what was happening was wrong. That when I came back to Europe, I felt it was some sort of a duty, as a privileged citizen. You don't choose where you were born, right? I was lucky to be born in France and not to be born in a war sort of torn country, being Palestine, Afghanistan, Iraq, Ethiopia, Sudan. So I think you've been given this privilege without asking for it, but you have to give something in return, right? So I think that's what's happening with a lot of people.
But I have the feeling also that a lot of different political groups fighting for their own struggles are gathering together or find in the Palestinian struggle a reason to join their cause. Or they find some kind of a resonance, for example, black movements in the United States, or native aboriginal in Australia, or workers' unions, or feminists.
We come back to sort of the first point, global Palestine. I think in Palestine you will see all the struggles of the world pretty much combined in one place. And I think that's why we are, sort of Palestine pro-justice activism. We are advocating for Palestine to become a social justice cause, not a Middle East cause, not an anti-apartheid cause, a social justice. If you fight for women's rights, if you fight for the environment, if you fight for justice, if you fight against the prison industrial complex, if you fight against wars, Palestine should be on your list as an organization, as a movement, etc. Because it's the opposite is the same, right? Palestinians should also talk about what's happening to the black people in the US, to Aboriginals in Australia, to the Mapuche people in Chile, and also because it's very linked. And I mean, when before the interview we were talking about the and I forgot the term, oppressed.
The tradition of the oppressed from Walter Benjamin.
Yeah, the tradition of the oppressed, and that's what's happening. You know, when you see what happened to Palestine, this sort of ethnic cleansing, and the way people were taken from their homes, etc., you can really relate, and you can really understand also what's happening to the Aboriginal people in Australia. You can understand what's happening to what happened to the Indian Americans in the States. You can relate to the Black civil rights movement in the States. You can relate to the Mapuche people again in Chile. I mean, you know, people talk about the tradition of the oppressed. John Berger, the UK activist, painter, author, who passed away actually last 2 years ago or something, once said that the struggle will be endless. And I think this is the same type of stuff that, you know, the struggle is endless because there's, you know, as a people and even as a person, you are always looking to sort of better yourself, right? So, in a way, you're looking for enlightenment. You will never be the perfect person. You will never be the perfect movement. You will never be the perfect struggle. And look at South Africa apartheid. You know, when the ANC came to power, people thought the struggle was over. But when you go to South Africa now, you realize that it's far from over. And that even if the legal system of apartheid crumbled, socially, the apartheid still exists. So it's a continuation of a struggle. And so, in a way, life is a struggle. But it doesn't mean you have to be depressed about it or you have to be sad about it. You know, another amazing man, Howard Zinn, the U.S. historian who wrote the book "A People History of the United States of America."
Yeah, that's where he rewrote the history of the United States
from a people's perspective.
Yeah.
Howard Zinn said one day that struggling should be exhilarating. You know, the fact that white, black, brown people, you know, from all walks of life, from all political backgrounds, actually fighting together, hand by hand, towards a common goal, is something pretty incredible. And even more so now in the society we live in, when it's all turned about, you know, egoistical matters, you know, individualism. You have to care about your house, your rent, your car. Don't worry about the neighbor and stuff. The fact that people actually that are not Palestinians, are not Israelis, are not Jews, are not Muslims, actually fighting for justice in Palestine is something that should be celebrated, you know, and something that people should be proud for, should be happy about. And in a way, if you look at a struggle, you know, if every day you wake up and you think, damn, Palestine is not free today, you know, you will get depressed, you will get down. And I've known so many activists that have sort of burned out because it's hard to struggle for something that where on the ground you know that things are going sort of from bad to worse. But if you focus on the small victories, you know, if you focus on the journey from point A to point Z, you know, to A, B, C, if you focus on the fact that you convince your dad and your mom that actually Palestine was a just cause, if you focus on the fact that at last demonstration there were like 5,000 people instead of 2,000 people, if you focus on the fact that this big church in the US divested from Israel, then you can continue the struggle, and then it's actually quite beautiful.
Frank, how do you see, honestly, the next years? How do you see the future in this struggle for justice and human dignity?
I mean, I wish I could predict, obviously, the future, but I think it's gonna, as activists, the hard part is actually to sustain momentum. The problem is that every time something really bad happens in Gaza, there's the peak in activism. You know, you see like hundreds of thousands of people in the streets and people joining, organization, solidarity movements, etc. And then it's sort of, you know, the media will tell you, you know, oh, we're going through some sort of calm period on the ground in Palestine, which is obviously not true. It's not because 2,000 people don't die in Gaza that it's calm in Palestine. You know, there's, you know, harassment every day on a daily basis in Gaza. There's young kids going to jail every day in Gaza. There's, you know, checkpoints are open are closed every day in Palestine. So I think the point now is to sustain this movement, and I think it's going to continue to grow, because the more radical our enemy gets, the more crazy Netanyahu gets, the more crazy Trump gets, the more people will see that they have to fight against this type of people. And I mean, the way now Netanyahu is again pushing for war with Iran, the way he wants the US agreement that was signed between Obama and Iran to be erased, and he's pushing through crazy rhetoric with no facts. He's just, but that's what happens when people have been saying stuff like that with a total level of impunity for many years. They become these big monsters, that nothing can stop. So I think the more this is going to happen, the more people are going to fight against this, and the more people are going to link all these struggles together, again, in the US, in Oceania, in Latin America, in Europe. And I mean, there's only, two ways, right? I mean, you either sort of stand up and fight, or you die on your knees, right? And I think people have been made to believe for many years that they were alone, they were by themselves, the solidarity movement didn't exist, which was not true. And they slowly realized that no, they're not alone. There are people all over the world fighting injustice in its various forms. So that's a positive thing, and that's something that we should take forward for the future.
Okay, Frank, thank you. I think we're unfortunately out of time. Would have loved to continue this interview with you. Thank you for your time. Thank you for your answers.
Yeah, sure.
And I wish you good luck for the rest of the fight.
Thanks, Jeremy.
Ciao.
Ciao. Bye-bye.
So that was Frank Barra, an interview recorded a few weeks ago. We're still on Collabo Radio for about 10 minutes. And before the end of our show, I would like to thank all the people involved. Seamus, Marie, Vera, Alex, Cedric, Zuki, Dira, of course, Rosanna, of course, too, Romain, Nico, Miriam, who else? I think I've forgotten someone. But I would like also to send a message to my friend Abu Bakr Bashir, who is living in Gaza, is reporting for the one of Wall Street Journal, yeah. And I sent him a mail 2 days ago. I wanted to have an interview at the end of these 3 hours on the radio, but he didn't reply. I hope that he's still alive and well-being. So Abu, if you hear me, just wanted to say that you're not alone, and we'll continue to fight to free you and your people. And before the end, I'd like to read another text from Hannah Arendt, but a very short one. This is an extract from the Collective Responsibility, written in 1968. And this text is very important to me because it talks about how and why we're all responsible for everything that happens on this planet. And this is why also Palestine, the conflict in Palestine, is so global and should be fought by everyone. So this is the extract from Hannah Arendt. No moral, individual and personal standards of conduct will ever be able to excuse us from collective responsibility. This vicarious responsibility for things we have not done, this taking upon ourselves the consequences for things we are entirely innocent of, is the price we pay for the fact that we live our lives not by ourselves but among our fellow men. And that is the faculty of action, which, after all, is the political faculty par excellence, can be actualized only in one of the many and manifold forms of human community. That was Jérémy Pujol on Collabo Radio in Berlin. And now I think we're going to hear another piece of sound by another Palestinian musician. Seamus, Cedric, if you might.
So we are going to finish the show with a collaboration between Axel Dorner from Berlin and Jassam Hindi from Palestine, Lebanon and France. It's an extract of a vinyl. It's a long piece basically called Waterkill. The vinyl is called Waterkill and the piece Cowl, I guess it's called. Thank you for listening and supporting the show. Well, see you. Bye-bye.